So what you're going to get in this episode is you're going to get who really controls the price of oil, should we blame the president, and what is the future state of oil for the United States. And it's not super great, so let's get into it.
As fantastic a CFP as Mello is, and as wonderful an attorney as I am, please do note that anything said in our show are our opinions alone and are not meant to be taken as financial or legal advice.
Welcome to Finances, the Other F Word, a Gen Xer podcast for musicians and music lovers, where we discuss money and music without all the pretentious bullshit. Here are your hosts, Zoe Terry, attorney at large, and Mel O, certified financial planner and author of Finances, the Other F Word. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, and welcome to Finances, the Other F Word. And on this episode, we are going to talk about who really controls oil prices. Now, Zoe is not on this show because she is actually working. So Zoe got a job at the Legal Aid Center of Nevada, where she is the advocate, the lawyering advocate for children. And for those of you who have been listening to this show for any length of time, you know that Zoe is a slut for injustice. So that is like right up her alley. It is hot as balls right now in Vegas, so I'm trying to get my fan to work but not be too fucking loud at the same time. I got all kinds of shit going on here. And real quickly, before we get started, I wanted to give a shout out to our patrons. We got Low Poly Geo. So what's up? How you doing, woman? And the Ghost Story guys, of course, our favorite Brennan Store. We love him. And if you guys have not checked out his podcast yet, please do. The Ghost Story guys, it's fucking phenomenal. He's funny as hell. I'm older than him, so I'm going to say that he's a male version of me. And of course, our fucking rock star level patron, Kara Grandel, she's just a fucking mammoth of supporter on the show. And we really sincerely appreciate it. And we've been going through some changes here at the show because the market is going nuts. And anytime the market goes nuts, my workload doubles and triples. So we're trying to get our new footing right now as far as with Zoe's new job and as far as with, changing up the schedule. But we have some really stellar guests that are coming on that are pretty fucking amazing. So I'm really excited. So what you're going to get in this episode is you're going to get who really controls the price of oil, should we blame the president, and what is the future state of oil for the United States. And it's not super great. So let's get into it. Now, let me explain to you guys why the idea for this episode came up. I went to the gas station, I don't even know when it was, a month ago, and I went to get gas, and there's a sticker of Joe Biden, and he's pointing, and he's like, looking like he's screaming at somebody. And then the caption bubble says, I did this. And the finger is pointing to the price of gas. And this was right when it started climbing up. I think at that point it was in the high 4s or maybe the low 5s. And I just looked at it and I thought, these people have no fucking idea how oil works. And the thing is that I'm like, I need to get up to speed on how the oil works. And the things that concern me is that it's very tentative topics like this that the two parties can continue to divide us as Americans. Because if you're a Republican, and we'll go through this as I start giving you guys some facts, and of course all resources are disclosed, then they're angry at Biden because of the price of oil and they think that they're going to do XYZ. And then of course, if there's a Republican president in office, then the Democrats are mad at them and then they use it as a posturing tool. But this is where this show is so important. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me while I go through all of the changes to be able to continue to give you guys good content as well as keep my business afloat and do the myriad of 1,000 other things that I'm doing. And I want people to be informed because I don't want this shit to divide us anymore. Because then we're just going to constantly be in this state where we're always angry at each other and they're smoke and mirror, they're blowing smoke up our ass. So let's get into it. So let's talk about who controls the price of oil and how it's set. So many of you may be familiar with OPEC. So OPEC stands for the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, thus OPEC, and it's a permanent intergovernmental organization created in a Baghdad conference September 10th through the 14th in 1960 by Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. And OPEC manages the supply of oil around the globe and tries to set the prices of oil in the global marketplace by trying to keep them stable. But we'll find out, like any organization, they're actually trying to keep them expensive as well. So yes, they're trying to stabilize prices, but at the same time, they're also trying to make sure that they're going to get their best dollar possible. And when OPEC was created, it was created to protect the Middle East crude exporters. And at the time that OPEC was created in 1960, the United States dominated oil. We were the largest producer of oil, and we were also the largest consumer of oil. And so the Middle Eastern companies were like, fuck this shit, because these guys are running the market on it. So we're going to make our own organization as a way to try to protect our interests. And this is nothing new. We've seen this with a variety of different organizations. And obviously this one has stuck. So in order for a country to become a member of OPEC, they need to, quote, have a substantial net export of crude petroleum, which has fundamentally similar interests of those member countries, and may become a full member of the organization if accepted by a majority of 3/4 of full members, including the concurring votes of all founding members. So we're going to talk here in a minute about who actually founded OPEC. So not only do they have to have a 3/4 vote of it, they also need to have basically the godfather sign off of all of the founding members. So there's two organizations really. There's OPEC and there's OPEC Plus. And OPEC Plus is often kind of looked at like OPEC's little stepbrother. But we're going to see here in a minute that OPEC Plus actually garners more strength than OPEC. So OPEC and OPEC Plus are groups of oil exporting countries that utilize supply quotas to try to secure the highest long-term prices for their members, right? I mean, they're a cartel. So high prices first, stabilization is second, or in my opinion, stabilization is only when necessary. And OPEC and OPEC Plus set their supply targets by consensus. But we see that Saudi Arabia is the top exporter with the most spare capacity. So the United States has oil reserves, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. But out of OPEC and OPEC Plus, Saudi Arabia has the largest, they're sitting on the largest supply of oil of extra capacity. And so this is putting the United States in a situation where we have to deal with the Middle East more and more because the U.S. is not producing as much oil. And there's a variety of reasons, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. So between the dominance of the U.S. oil in the 1960s and with the Arabian oil embargo of the 1973 and 74, and I wasn't alive for part of that, and I was too young to remember any of it, but of course you guys will be familiar with that. This is where in the United States people had to line up. They had a certain day that they could get gas, and it was based on their license plate, and people were just lined around the block trying to get oil, and that was due to the oil embargo. So the Middle East was like, you know what, fuck you guys, and they did their own thing, and now we're just forever hating each other. You know, we're constantly, the United States is constantly in a situation where we're dealing with OPEC, and OPEC, quite frankly, for the most part, has us by the balls, and we're going to find out why that is. So the U.S. had strong consumption of oil growth during the 60s, but produced less domestic oil through the 70s, and then what that did was that gave the oil producing countries of OPEC a stronger foothold. And so today we see that even though the United States is still the biggest producer of oil at 14.5%, the other oil producers globally are so large and diverse that we can no longer run the market. We can no longer dominate it. So we still technically produce, as of today, the most oil, but when you put us against all of the other countries, we're such a small fish in the oil game now. And we're going to talk a little bit about here in a minute about electric cars. And many of you who have followed my show know that I'm a tree hugger, but I am not a fan of electric cars. However, I am changing that a little bit, and we'll find out why in a minute. So around 2011, we had a lot of shale oil. And the U.S. started to try to produce more oil, and then that was the whole fracking thing that everybody was talking about. And so then in about 2014, OPEC increased its output of oil prices, trying to damage the gains in the U.S. oil production and basically push the price of oil down. And this is the crux of the majority of what happens with oil prices. So I don't give a fuck how you feel about Biden. I don't give a fuck how you feel about Trump. The bottom line is that as most economics go, oil is based on supply and demand. What you have, though, is you have the United States and you have the OPEC countries and OPEC plus countries that are in a constant fight with each other that, quite frankly, the United States cannot produce enough oil now to try to control to their advantage the price of oil, because now the weight has shifted to the OPEC countries. So we need to get off this bullshit about who you think should be president, and we need to start looking at the real stuff, and we need to stop fighting amongst ourselves. Because people, you need to fucking understand what runs stuff so that when people say stupid shit like this, you can be informed, at least for yourself, and know, yeah, you know what, that's not really how that fucking works, right? The current members of OPEC include Algeria, Angola, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Venezuela. So this is how it works. Each member of the organization has one vote, and it requires a unanimous consent when it comes to oil production. So when we talked about how they design their quotas, it's by consensus. Everybody has one vote and everybody has to be on the same team. Again, by using this tactic, they are helping to cripple the United States oil game because they're just bigger than us. That's the way it is. So Saudi Arabia held the majority of clout in the OPEC decision making because it is by far the top producer and exporter, and of course has the largest spare supply of oil in the organization. And in 2021, Saudi Arabia accounted for 34% of OPEC's crude oil output, which is twice as much as the next highest producer in the organization, which is Iraq. So they are double Iraq, and Iraq is number 2. So this gives you a sense of how much weight Saudi Arabia holds. Now, oil produced from the OPEC countries accounted for 28% of global petroleum liquids production in January 2022 of this year. So even though the U.S. is still the largest producer of oil, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they do expect that the U.S. crude oil production will peak in 2030 to 2035. And then while OPEC's countries' productions is expected to continue to rise through 2050. So think about that for a minute. If the United States peaks at oil production literally here in just 10 years, but the other countries combined in the OPEC, they continue to be able to increase production, they will fucking run us, okay? They will run all of the oil supply, and if we don't start making a switch to electric vehicles or some other type of transportation, we are going to be completely fucked. Now, I am not a fan of electric cars. And the reason why I'm not a fan of the electric cars is because the process to make the electric car is extremely damaging to the environment. Number 1. Number 2, the half-life on those motherfuckers is forever. I was very excited when I heard about Teslas and everything, and I'm like, fuck yeah, finally, we're gonna fight climate change and all this other good shit. Then I was like, oh shit, that's fucking awful. That's severely damaging to the environment, and not to mention for any of those of you who have been following any kind of information, specifically Las Vegas, they keep finding dead bodies in Lake Mead, which we had a mob history, you guys. It is what it is, right? And I thought it was funny because they found one body and the police was like, oh, we definitely think it's a homicide. I'm like, oh, does the gunshot wound to the back of the person's fucking head tell you it's a homicide? Yes, motherfucker, it's a mob hit. I mean, we all know it, right? But Lake Mead is so low right now that if you go to Lake Mead, there's a huge measuring stick where the water originally was, and the water line is so far below that, it is ridiculous. Well, we get a lot of our power from the dam. Well, that is going to be a problem going forward if we're running the fuck out of water. And of course, we have talked to extent on this show about the U.S. power grid. So if we do make the switch to electric vehicles, and I would have to do more research to see as far as how much electricity it takes to actually power up the batteries and if there's a better consumption of that or a conversion. But we have rolling blackouts. We have rolling blackouts through California. We've had rolling blackouts through New York because our power grid can't take it. So if we do come off oil, and we do all switch to the electric car, well, then we're still consuming copious amounts of electricity to try to get these motherfuckers to run. But for me, as much as I'm not a fan of electric cars, and Stormy had a hard-on for Teslas. He talked about it all the time. He loves his Tesla, and it's a great car. But for me, my concern is I think that we should stop being so concerned about Republicans and Democrats fighting amongst each other about who's in power and start looking at the bigger picture that the United States is in a situation where the OPEC and OPEC plus countries are going to fucking run us. And if we're so busy infighting about bullshit party lines, we're going to miss this and we are all going to be bent the fuck over. And this is a big deal. So let's talk about how we use in the United States, how we use our oil. So 67.2% of oil in the United States is used for transportation. 26.9% of oil is used for industrial use. 2.8% used for residential, and 2.5% used for commercial, and 0.5% is used for electric power. currently. Then we have the subgroup that I've alluded to known as OPEC Plus. And this is the group that Russia belongs to. And the reason why this is a big deal is because we still have issues going on with Russia and Ukraine. And we're starting to see the effects of the war, as I reported on a couple episodes back when the war against Ukraine started, that Ukraine and Russia export 1/10 of the calories consumed globally. And I got some fuckers on TikTok that was like, oh, there's not going to be famine. Fuck off, asshole. Look what's happening right now. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, you guys. I mean, this is just fucking research. And this is why I do this, because I know not everybody has the time to dig into these issues, but quite frankly, it makes me a better advisor, and I want to fucking know. And I want you guys to know. And I want you to be informed on what the fuck is really going on so that you guys can do and think the way you want to think. You don't got to think like me. So there's a huge hubbub right now with the Eastern Hemisphere and dealing with Russia and their dependence on Russian oil, especially in relation to their geographic location. So Russia is a part of OPEC Plus. Now, OPEC Plus is like OPEC, and it requires the consensus of members, but the non-OPEC countries, which export crude oil, are members of OPEC Plus, and those countries include, and I should have looked up how to pronounce these, and I'm going to fuck them all up, but whatever, YOLO, bitches, let's go. Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Brunei, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Mexico, Oman, Russia, South Sudan, and Sudan. And OPEC Plus formed in Algiers in 2016. Now, OPEC Plus has 14 member countries, and they control 35% of global oil supplies. In addition to that, 82% of proven reserves. So remember how I told you earlier that OPEC Plus is looked at as OPEC's little brother? Well, OPEC Plus has 82% of the proven reserves. And again, if you go back to my statistic, if we are going to peak at oil production in 2035, then these motherfuckers are going to be running shit. OPEC Plus, they're the ones who have 82% of the proven reserves. So when you add in the OPEC Plus producing countries like Russia, Mexico, Kazakhstan, the percentage increases to 55% and 90% of the proven reserves. So this is a big deal, you guys. So because of this production, the OPEC Plus subgroup gives an extra oomph to the OPEC countries and just allows them to run the market on oil even more. And that can have a variety of trickle-down effects. Think of a lot of the huge oil companies that are in the United States and how many people that they employ. I mean, it's really putting us in a situation where they have us by the balls, and something for real needs to fucking change. Now, India has almost spent $120 billion importing more than 228.6 million tons of crude oil and imports almost $23 billion worth of oil yearly, but it's still only ranked third of oil consumption behind the United States and China. India also imports oil from the OPEC countries. So check out what I just said. China's behind us and India is third. United States is still the biggest consumer. And how much of a more vulnerable spot does that put us in? You see what I'm saying? Because we technically, currently, right now, we consume the most oil. It's not a really good place to be. And currently, as of the time of this recording, Russia is producing less oil than before the war, but they are ramping up. So what we're seeing with India coming in and buying large amounts of oil from Russia, India has been supplying the coffers of Russia for war. And again, you can't really be mad at India. India is doing what's right for their people, and isn't that what we want our government to do? So, if the U.S. produces the most oil, why is there an oil price increase? And this is the crux of what this whole conversation is, because we're going to find that what the president and the government can do is very fucking limited. So the top 5 crude oil producers and their percentages as far as global market share are as follows. United States, 14.5%, Russia, 13.1%, Saudi Arabia, 12.1%, Canada, 5.8%, Iraq, 5.3%. The top 5 crude oil producing states and their percentages for the United States are as follows. Texas, 42.7%. I did not know these motherfuckers produced that much oil. New Mexico, 11.3%. North Dakota, 9.6%, Alaska, 3.9%, and Colorado, 3.5%. So it's interesting because there's always fights about nature in Alaska and drilling in Alaska, and Alaska actually only produces 4%, and Texas, who is the highest producing oil state, is 42.7%. The government overall can do very little stuff. So the United States has a federal gas tax, which is 18.4 cents per gallon. And that amount was increased to that amount in 1993, and it hasn't moved since. And this is where we come to the dichotomy of the parties. A Democrat doesn't want to be accused of raising oil prices, and a Republican doesn't want to be accused of raising oil prices, because in the end, the only thing either fucking party gives a shit about is getting back in power. So this belief that whatever administration is currently in power, that they're intentionally not doing enough to lower oil prices is fucking ridiculous. Because if we know one thing in the United States, is that the politicians give a fuck about themselves before they give a fuck about any of us. And I don't give a damn what fucking party you coincide with. These bitches do not give a shit about us. And none of them want to lose elections. And so none of them want to be accused of raising oil prices. And this is why they get us stuck up in this, because they can throw it around constantly as, oh, well, you know, gas went up here. Well, gas went up there when your administration. We're going to find out that gases went up during every fucking administration. So when you hear politicians jockeying for a position and you hear that shit, fuck those guys. Now you know. Now you know how oil works. So now, can the U.S. government produce more oil? Yes, it can. And of course, gas prices are predominantly dependent on oil prices, and oil prices are ran by supply and demand. Like I just said, when we had we were starting to make headway in the United States with shale oil, the OPEC nations just came in and they flooded the market with oil and they pushed the price down, and there went America's gain. When we're talking about elections and we're talking about gas prices, whoever party that you're against, you say that, oh, it's gone up more. But of course, like with everything, people have short-term memory. So on March 8th, Joe Biden announced that the United States was banning banning buys of Russian oil because of the Ukraine invasion. And we talked about that in a previous episode. And so a lot of people will tell you, well, it's, the president's fault. I mean, he could just, open up all the oil lines and we'd be fine. Okay, listen to me, friends. I don't give a fuck who's in office. I don't give a damn if it's a Democrat. I don't give a fuck if it's a Republican. It does not work like that. And let's assume that they could just go, and they could just fucking turn on all of the oil pipes. And then we would flood, I'm doing air quotes, nobody can see unless you're watching me on YouTube, flood the market with supply. Well, no, it doesn't work like that. You don't go fucking turn on a switch. You know what I mean? Remember in the episode Texas Deep Freeze, we talked about how when the power grid for the state of Texas completely failed, all of the oil riggings froze up, and then they had to thaw it, then they had to check it and make sure that there was no damage to the fucking things before they could even get them producing oil again. So take that and then take it even a step farther, where you have maybe oil drills that haven't been turned on in a while, or you need to actually do the oil drills. Even if you could click your fingers, that shit has to go through regulations. That shit needs to hire crews. They need to survey. They need to find out where the fucking oil is. And so this belief that the president, regardless of who they are, in the past it's been a he, can just control oil by opening up our supply is absolutely ridiculous. And we do have some reserves, but our reserves on the world stage is only 4%. So the United States only has 4% of the world's oil reserves. Now, what did I say about OPEC Plus? 82%, okay? 4%. 82%. You see how we're outnumbered here? So even if we doubled it, even if we said, I don't like that guy, get my guy in there, and then now my guy turns on it, and even if he could snap his fingers and open up all the lines, we double it to 8%? What the fuck you gonna do with 8% of the world's oil reserves up against 82% with OPEC nations globally? And this is what I'm talking about. So this is how we keep getting pitted against each other. And again, even if we did decide to open up everything, it's gonna fucking take at least 5, 6, 7 years in order to get everything producing. And the deal is, at that time, is that whatever administration was in there is probably out, and anything that can be done can be undone, right? Now, as the United States, we do have a strategic petroleum reserve, and many presidents have tapped into this before. And Biden, along with other, like I said, past presidents, has attempted to try to stave off higher oil prices by tapping into this reserve. But the thing is that, again, our reserve is not that great, y'all. It's not that big, okay? So there's only so much that they can do, and that is in the control somewhat of the president, of tapping into the oil reserves. So to further this point, since the year 2000, every U.S. president, when they left office, gas prices were higher than when they went in. Every president since 2000 over both parties, they have left office with gas prices higher than they went in. So do you think that a president wants their legacy to be that, they were the one who ran up gas prices? No. So again, it further goes into the fact that there's limited control that the United States government can have over oil. So let's look at some of those presidents. So Bill Clinton left office with gas prices 39 cents higher. So they went from $1.06 to $1.47. George W. Bush also left office with gas prices 39 cents higher from $1.47 to $1.84. Barack Obama left office with gas prices 49 cents higher from $1.84 to $2.33. And Donald Trump, he left office and gas prices were 6 cents higher only, from $2.33 to $2.39. So you might think, oh my God, well, whatever fucking, he did, let's do that. Well, in the middle of his administration, we had COVID. And what did I tell you earlier in the show? It's supply and demand. And so the thing is that supply around the world dropped off. Globally, people were locked in. We had major lockups in India. Just recently, Shanghai is finally coming off their zero COVID policy where they continued to have people locked down. That is demand dropping off for oil. And so what we saw that the demand for gasoline dropped 5.7% compared to Trump's first week in office during COVID. So even with a global less demand of oil, we still saw that when President Trump left office, it was 6 cents higher. So this, again, is not talking to an administration. This is talking to a simple fact of supply and demand. And there's also some interesting things that I came across that I had never knew was a thing, and I wanted to share it with you as we wrap up here. There's different blends of gasoline, which I had never fucking knew that. So in the winter, refineries make a gas that is higher REID vapor pressure or REID vapor pressure, which allows the fuel to evaporate more quickly so that cars can start easier in the winter. That is one refining process. And then in the summertime, refineries have to switch to a summer blend fuel, which is more expensive to make than the winter blend fuel, and it takes longer to produce the summer blend fuel, and the yield per barrel of oil is lower. So all of these things combined are typically when we see that the price of gas spike in the summertime, as well as demand increasing because more people are traveling. So we have demand going up, plus you have a switch over to a summer blend. And so like I stated before, I don't care how you think. Okay, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I just want to give you numbers so that whatever you decide, whatever line you want to toe, you understand the situation. I am not a fan of electric cars, but something has got to change, because when we're talking about the United States from a defensive position, we are looking at the fact that we're going to be caught by the short hairs coming up here very, very, very soon if we do not figure out a way to break our dependence on oil. So I want you guys to know the numbers. I'm going to have all of the resources disclosed as I always do in the show notes. I really appreciate you guys for listening. If you have any topics that you want me to cover, please let me know and I will be more than happy to cover them. And as always, I appreciate you guys for listening. We have some fun interviews coming up with music producers that I think you guys are going to totally enjoy. And I appreciate you hanging out. And with that, we are out this bitch.
Thanks for listening. If you like us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.